The morning light filtered through the tall glass windows of Crestwood Academy, painting streaks of gold across the polished marble floors. The school was not just any academy, it was the kind of place where the children of billionaires were dropped off in chauffeur-driven cars and where the cafeteria looked more like a five-star restaurant than a school dining hall. The air itself seemed to carry a sense of privilege. Yet among the whispers of wealth and the soft shuffle of designer shoes was one man whose world stood far apart from theirs, the janitor, Mr. Walter Hayes. Walter was a man in his late 50s, thin and quiet, his uniform always clean though faded with years of wear. He moved through the school like a shadow, sweeping floors before dawn and polishing the brass railings long after the students had left. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, his words were gentle, almost apologetic. The students barely noticed him. To them, he was invisible, part of the background, like the faint hum of the air conditioning or the distant ticking of the school clock. Yet, behind his tired eyes was a man who once had dreams. Years ago, before life had worn him down, Walter had been a musician. He had studied piano in his youth and once performed in small bars and community halls, dreaming of grand stages. But when his wife fell ill and hospital bills piled up, the piano keys turned into luxuries he could no longer afford to touch. He sold his instrument, took odd jobs, and eventually settled into the quiet life of a janitor. Music became a memory, locked away behind responsibilities and regret. Every morning, as he cleaned the music room, Walter would linger just a little longer. There, standing in the center like a jewel, was a grand Steinway piano. Its sleek black surface reflected the morning sun, and every time his rag brushed over it to clear away dust, something inside him stirred, a mixture of longing and ache. He never dared to play it. It was forbidden for staff to touch student instruments, especially one as expensive as that. The piano belonged to the academy's most talented student, a girl named Alara Beaumont. Alara was the daughter of one of the wealthiest families in the city. Her father was a real estate tycoon, her mother a former concert pianist. She had grown up surrounded by elegance, her life a careful composition of lessons, performances, and expectations. The school adored her, teachers praised her discipline, students envied her grace. But beneath her polished exterior, Alara carried her own storm, the pressure to live up to a mother she could never surpass. Yes, Victoria said tersely, brushing wet hair from her eyes. I think the engine overheated. I need it fixed quickly. He nodded, stepping closer. I can take a look. You're lucky. It's not far from my workshop. Something about his presence felt familiar, though she couldn't immediately place why. There was a subtle tension in the air, like the moment right before recognition strikes. She studied him briefly, noticing the faint scar on his jaw, the way his eyes, deep and contemplative, seemed to assess her with careful calculation. All right, she said finally. Lead the way. The workshop was small but tidy, a reflection of someone who cared deeply about his craft. Tools gleamed under dim fluorescent lights, oil stains marking years of diligent work. He gestured toward her car, his movements precise, methodical. As he popped the hood, Victoria leaned against the wall, arms crossed, trying not to let her curiosity betray her. Let me see what we're dealing with, he said, peering into the engine. His hands moved with practiced ease, checking connections, twisting wires, testing components. Victoria found herself watching him more closely than necessary, memories of someone long forgotten flickering at the edges of her mind. There was a familiarity in the set of his shoulders, in the way he worked silently, confidently. Victoria, the sound of her name, spoken softly, made her freeze mid-breath. She turned sharply, her eyes widening. He was looking at her, a small, incredulous smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Is it really you? Her heart skipped. She hadn't heard that voice in years, not since the summers of her youth, not since the days before ambition had hardened her world. Daniel, she whispered, disbelief threading through every syllable. Yes, he said, stepping back, letting his gaze travel over her like he was taking her in all over again. Victoria Emerson, I can't believe it's you. For a long moment, they simply stared, the rain outside creating a rhythm that matched the rapid beating of her heart. Memories crashed over her. Laughter in sun-drenched meadows, stolen glances beneath the shade of old oak trees, promises whispered in the twilight that had once felt eternal. And now here he was, standing before her, more rugged, more worldly, yet unmistakably the boy she had loved with all her heart before life had intervened. I didn't expect. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she managed, her voice trembling slightly. I could say the same, Daniel said softly. Though I have to admit, seeing you in this context is surprising. His eyes flickered down at her designer coat, the expensive shoes, the unmistakable aura of wealth she carried like armor. Then they returned to her face, searching, questioning, reading years of unspoken words. Victoria started, then stopped. The weight of her life, the choices she had made, pressed down on her suddenly. She had climbed every rung of success, accumulated wealth, influence, and recognition. And yet, standing here, drenched in rain, faced with the person she had loved first and perhaps loved most, she felt stripped of all pretense. Daniel shook his head slightly, as if acknowledging the unspoken tension. Don't worry about the car for a moment, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips despite the seriousness of his tone. I'll fix it. You just sit for a moment. He worked silently, and Victoria found herself drifting, watching him, memories mingling with the present. She remembered the way he had once laughed when she had tried to impress him with her clumsy attempts at painting. She remembered the quiet courage he had shown when standing up for what was right, even when no one else would. She remembered the warmth of his hand in hers, a touch that had lingered in her memory far longer than she cared to admit. Done, he said finally, wiping his hands on a rag. There, should run smoothly now. Victoria blinked, torn between relief and the storm of emotions raging within her. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the years, to tell him how much she had missed him, how often she had thought of him in lonely hotel rooms, in board meetings, in moments when her heart longed for something she couldn't name. Thank you, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. Really, thank you, Daniel nodded, a shadow crossing his features. You don't have to thank me. I mean, it's just a car, Victoria. You're still the same person, I see. Just different. Yes, she said softly. Different, older, wiser, or so I like to think. He smiled faintly, and for a moment, the years seemed to collapse, leaving just the two of them, standing in a small workshop filled with the scent of oil and rain. Yet, beneath the nostalgia, there was tension, unspoken questions that neither knew how to ask. How had life led them here? Why now? And most importantly, could the fragile spark that had never truly extinguished survive the realities of their separate worlds? Victoria turned to leave, the familiar barrier of her professional poise returning, though now tinged with uncertainty. I should get going. Important meeting. Daniel's gaze followed her, lingering on her as if trying to memorize every detail. Victoria, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Will I see you again? She hesitated, the memory of summers past whispering through her mind. For a fleeting moment, she considered saying yes, throwing caution to the wind, embracing a chance she hadn't thought possible. But the weight of responsibility, of her meticulously constructed life, pressed down on her shoulders. I don't know, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, understanding, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of disappointment. All right, he said, forcing a small smile. But maybe fate will decide for us. Victoria gave a small, wry smile in return, then stepped out into the rain, the engine purring smoothly behind her. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the image of Daniel's face, the surge of old emotions, and the gnawing question that would not leave her. Could the first love she had lost in pursuit of everything else still be waiting for her somewhere in the future? For the first time in years, Victoria felt her heart unguarded, raw, and achingly alive. And somewhere deep down, she knew that tonight was only the beginning. The night the rain had returned, the night fate had intervened, and the night the past had caught up with her, was destined to change everything. As the city lights shimmered in the distance, Victoria's mind replayed every stolen glance, every whispered promise from her youth, mingling with the sight of Daniel's face, the mechanic who had once been her entire world, and perhaps still was. Somewhere between the choices she had made and the life she had built, a thread of possibility remained, fragile but undeniable. And that thread, she realized, was enough to make her hope again. Because sometimes, Life had a way of reminding you that the people you never truly forget, never truly leave. As weeks went by, Walter's spirit lifted. The man who had once buried his dreams now felt alive again. He played not for an audience, but for connection. Every note he touched carried a piece of his story, a story that had found a listener in the most unexpected place. But one afternoon, as fate would have it, the school principal walked past the music room while they were playing together. He stopped, puzzled by the sound of two pianos, the young prodigy and the janitor. He peered in, his expression turning from confusion to disapproval. Within minutes, word reached the administration. Staff were forbidden to engage with students beyond assigned duties, and Walter was called to the office. When Alara found out, she was furious, not at Walter, but at the injustice. She tried to speak to her teachers, to explain that he hadn't done anything wrong, but no one listened. To them, it was inappropriate, a breach of conduct. To her, it was something much deeper. The day Walter was told to leave, the rain returned, almost as if the sky itself was repeating that first day. He packed his things quietly, his uniform folded neatly, his face calm though his eyes betrayed sadness. As he walked through the empty halls, he passed the music room one last time. On the piano, there was another envelope. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a concert invitation. At the bottom, in small handwriting, it read, "For the man who taught me how to feel music again." That night, at the Academy's annual recital, the grand hall was filled with families, teachers, and guests. Alara stepped onto the stage, elegant and poised. But instead of playing the classical piece everyone expected, she placed a different sheet on the stand, one written in both her handwriting and his. The first notes began to play, and the melody that filled the room was one the audience had never heard before. It was the janitor's melody. The music rose and fell like a story, tender, aching, beautiful. When it ended, the hall was silent for a moment before erupting into applause. But Alara didn't bow right away. She looked out into the crowd, searching, and for a brief second, her eyes found him, standing quietly at the back, in his worn uniform, tears in his eyes. He smiled, and for the first time in years, he felt seen. The room was speechless, not because of wealth or prestige, but because they had all just witnessed something real, the meeting of two worlds through the universal language of music. And that was how a janitor, with nothing but a memory and a melody, changed the heart of a rich girl, and reminded everyone in that hall what true art really means.